Welcome to Starfleet Universe On Call. I am Paul Franz, owner of Franz Games. I'm an SFU Online, FedCom Online, and Starfleet Warlord. Just a reminder how to join us. We have TalkCast every Thursday night starting at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can either call on the phone, just dial 605-562-0444. Just follow the directions. And the call ID is 17702. Or you can participate on the web. Just go to the TalkShoe website at www.talkshoe.com. Search for call ID 17702, or search for Starfleet Universe On Call or SFU On Call. Any of those should on that website should be able to find us. And of course, if you want the best video and audio experience live, I would definitely go to twitch.tv. Yes, go to twitch.tv/SFU On Call, and you will find us there, and you'll be able also to join our wonderful chat room, which they'd be happy to say hello. Get lost. No, no, they're a very kind group. And of course, you need to contact me for any reason. My email address is sfuoncall@gmail.com. That's sfuoncall@gmail.com. Also, if you want to follow me on Twitter, my account there is also SFU On Call. And my personal account is Paul Franz. And of course, my business account is Franz Game, and that's while Twitter still exists. And of course, this lovely TalkCast gets turned into a podcast available on iTunes and various other feeds around the net. Some quick news from ADB this week. It's actually pretty quiet, but just a reminder that ADB did move to a new hosting provider. And just a note that I noticed that one thing that Gene mentioned, which was that unless ADB actually decides to drop their discussion boards, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. They will never be a website that actually uses HTTPS because, yes, the discussion board software is that old, where that software does not support HTTPS. My guess is that that they have hard-coded the protocol for any links, any redirections, any of that kind of thing. So it's not in the works at the moment. So unfortunately, it's going to be HTTP for probably until everything just completely implodes, including the internet. And found on the online store this week was the Tholian Master Starship book. Yes, they have a physical copy of the book. They're selling it for $24.95. This is the 9th volume in the long anticipated Master Starship book series. Now it includes every Tholian and Neo-Tholian ship in Starfleet battles, including X ships, general units that are specific to the Tholian Holdfast. This also includes information about the Tholians during the earlier period when they first arrived in the Milky Way galaxy. And every ship is illustrated. All updates, corrections, and errata have been added. The ships are in order regardless of the product they came from, with the enhanced format listing detailed information in a consistent manner. And of course, just a reminder, this does not have the SSDs. Moving on and forward, when it comes to the online client, not much happening there. When it comes to the SFB Online tournament, Sapphire Stars 14, we still have 7. Actually, I didn't check that, to be honest. I think, definitely. Round 1 is complete, and I am waiting for Stephen McCann to get back to me on when we can play. I told him that I'm available Friday, then I'm available Saturday. I'm hoping that I emailed him today, or I think it was today. I'll just say today, and asked him if he's available tomorrow, because I'd like to play tomorrow night, which would be fantastic. We could do it Saturday, but we definitely would have to take a break around 4 o'clock, because I have someplace to be at 4 o'clock. And if wants to, after that, we could play again Saturday night, and I'll be happy to do that after I make supper for my family and we eat. So with that, that is the news for this week. And it's me, so yes, the one and only Paul Friends, welcoming you to Starfleet Universe on Call. And tonight, well, we have Doug. Say hey, Doug.
Hello. How y'all doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Oh, come on. Guys, this is not the time I want to see that. Okay. So I'm bringing up Twitch on my iPad.
What's that?
Oh, it said something about something with iOS. Not sure what it said. I didn't have time to read it. And I'm a very slow reader, so I was like, I don't have time. Hopefully it'll pop up again sometime. But anyway, okay, Twitch looks good. Because I always like to see what I'm actually sending out. You know, and this is I have one screen. I don't have dual monitors at all because I don't have room for them in the small little office space I have. You know, and I see no reason why to actually set up a second one because this is my corner for my personal computing, and for those people who are watching the video, they can see on the other corner. They'll see possibly you'll see the monitor and also another computer. Well, that computer, that corner over there, that's my work area where I actually go to my day job. So I'm one of those people who firmly believes in the whole idea of separating work and pleasure, or personal and actually your day job, and not have the same computer for both. Not that don't have and also don't have the same place for both. I'm not one of those people that actually would work at home for work on the kitchen table. No, that's not what you do. It's not for me. That doesn't work. I need that mental separation, and of course, this moving it. What maybe 6 feet between the two spaces. That's good enough for me. To feel like I'm different environment and so forth, different mind space, and just Iggy. Just to let you know, the topic for this evening is going to be the Module R4J, the Romulan alternate history, which is interesting. Actually, I had a chance to actually sit down and read through the whole thing over this past weekend. So actually, it's some interesting ideas for alternate histories and how things came to be for the Romulans. And let me bring up the PDF. I'm not showing that at the moment on the screen. At the moment, I don't see any reason to actually show it on the video. If there is, I will definitely do so. But at the moment, there's no reason. But definitely, the A to B comes up with, there are a few ideas when it comes to an alternate history, and the three things that points out from the beginning, which is, okay, there are three broad ways that the Romulans could have gained warp technology earlier than they did in the original history. 1, develop it. 2, buy it. Or 3, find/capture it. And the one thing that seemed evident through reading everything that is in this module, buying it is a tough one. Meaning that's the one that it seems like A to B feels like is the least likely for it to happen. Because definitely one thing that was brought up about the whole idea of buying it was to get to that point and have it so it occurs earlier than basically buying it, acquiring it from the Klingons as part of the treaty at let me just see if I can Shmarba. And they get it, so they got earlier than that. One of the ways that was possible, but very unlikely to occur, which was the Orions, because of let me see, do I know that I'm just wondering if they have it here. Okay, yeah. Now, okay, this is what they mentioned about the binary option. Obviously the primary examples they bought from the Klingons. Another example is sorry, I apologize. Another possibility could have that Romulus buying warp technology from the Federation, Gorns, or Gendarians, who have somehow completely disenchanted enough with the situation that they wanted to affect the Romulans, or acquire it from a random Orion pirate who decides he wants to retire to Romulan riches. But the one thing that was mentioned about the buy option when it comes to the Orions is that most probably the Orions would not be very happy at all of any Orion who actually sold the warp technology to the Romulans, because otherwise as soon as the Romulans start finding the Orions, they find that the Orion incursions in their own territory, they attack them, and the earlier that occurs, the less of a buildup of riches that the Orions can take advantage of, while the Romulans are still running around in a pre-warp, pre-tactical warp society. Some of these alternate histories are quite interesting. One, okay, is this the one? Just give me a sec. Oh, yeah. Is this okay? I just want to double check. Right. Okay, this is the one. Which was one of the ones which is not. It's developed earlier than that, and the key point here is that the Romulans. Obviously, one of the biggest issues that the Romulans have overall when it comes to technology at all, and scientists and doing all the research, is the houses of the different Romulan, not lords, but the different Romulan houses, and they're always in competition with each other. Even though the Emperor might say, "Cut it out. We need to work together on this." Now, the one thing that was mentioned as part of the actual history of the Romulans is that the reason why warp technology, tactical warp technology, took so long to develop was because of this rivalry between the houses. And what would happen is that one of the houses would actually leak the information to the Gorns. So the Gorns would then attack another house's research lab, and therefore, especially there was a particular instance in Y67, where they were the Gorns were doing raids against the Romulans to keep the research, keep down the research, make sure that that the research didn't go forward, so that that the Gorns could then keep, make sure the Romulans could not get tactical warp, in which case it would be a bad thing for the Gorns. And one of the suppositions of, which actually they go in quite length, of if this happens, then in this case there was one critical raid that happened that stopped them in their tracks because of the critical information required to make the next leap, because normally research takes like 10 years to develop everything that's required, versus, and it mentions it in the beginning of the module, which is if you buy it, it only takes you 5 years. It's shorter term, it's a shorter uptake on it. Then you got the research, which takes 10 years, while acquiring it, I think that was also 5 years. I have to double check. Just give me a second. It's about 10 years, no, after they found or captured. Which is another one which is interesting. Because it mentions one of the scenarios where I'll get to that in a moment. Let's stick with currently what's called the failed raid, which is also in history. This mentioned here. In the original history, the raids had varying degrees of success. This is talking about the raids that started in Y67. And the primary one that ended up stopping the active Romulan research into tactical warp succeeded. In this history, the raid failed. And since the raid failed, the Romulans were able to complete the research and trials and new development, allowing the development of the tactical warp energy engines for their ships. Now, given that, what happens actually with this, what it says for the failed raid, here it is, mentions the failed raid. It says, while most of the raids were successful, the most important one in this alternative was not. The House and Trades was tipped off that another house was going to conduct a raid. While they did not know about the Gorn raid, they were accidentally prepared for it. They duplicated the lab in an undisclosed location, saved all the results and discoveries in real time. They moved the actual research to another location and replaced them with more junior researchers. They increased security. When the attackers turned out to be Gorns, the defenders were surprised, but they were more than ready to fight back. And this delayed the Gorn team enough that they were still fighting when the other house's attack team arrived. Because Romulan raid was expected, the defenders were able to maneuver both attackers in direct conflict, allowing defenders to stop both raids, although with very heavy losses, even though no longer necessary. The original lab was preserved and able to resume operation with the lab largely intact. Enough evidence was found to implicate the guilty houses, and with the preservation of lab research results and the researchers, the progress in warp technology was preserved. This caused the Emperor to redirect more resources into warp technology and force all houses to work together. The Emperor also redirected resources away from the research of the masking device, although that effort was not entirely killed. And so it goes. What happens then is talking about the whole, what the effect of that is. That since instead of failing, it succeeded. The Gorn still won the second Gorn-Romulan War. And it mentioned how the Gorns were being pressured. But and the thing is, Y672, Romulans have full W-Tech fleets, which is warp fleets, with taking the pre-warp ships and retrofitting them. It's just mentioned during this time they did not have any kind of tactical advantage over Gorns, so they did not launch a full-scale war, by contenting themselves with the border skirmishes and raids, these exercises allowed the Romulans to gain valuable combat experience with warp-powered warp ships, which makes sense. And this also served to warn the Gorns of the significant improvements of capabilities of the Romulan ship and their raiding efforts. And the funny part is about this goes through this, the whole, and in this case, it doesn't really change history all that much for this one. It just means that the Romulans took some more of the territory originally, but still, the big, other than the tactical warp, the other thing that really pushed the Romulans forward in the technology, obviously, was the warp, plasma torpedoes, moving from nuclear missiles to plasma torpedoes that could go at warp speed. But the thing is, that part was not improved better, quite more quickly. So it didn't really, at least in this timeline, it really didn't help the Romulans all that much when it comes to, being able to take over more things and so forth. The previous remnants are destroyed still by the Gorns, and so forth. I'll keep. So, but it goes through a really good example of this. And the thing is, the Treaty of Smarba, it wasn't as big of a deal because the Klingons, 159, the Treaty of Smarba, the Klingons reached out to the Romulans and were willing to make a deal. This worked well for the Romulans as it gave them an ally they now felt they needed, which kept them from being so isolated. The Klingons were willing to offer ships, technology experts, and trade. The Romulans had no need for ships, but did realize they could use technological infusion and trade profits. After a year of negotiation to Smarba, they gave Romulans access to Klingon technology and many technical experts, with giving the Klingons access to Romulan Moloch technology. The Romulans, of course, refused to share cloaking technology. As mentioned here, that the net result of this treaty was that the Romulans were able to significantly modernize their fleet. This paid immediate benefits and laid the foundation that would come the Hulk series. And as I mentioned, it really didn't change that much of the war. It's just noting here that that the Gorns ended up with a bigger fleet, as they had much more dangerous neighbor because they had tactical warp. And the Y105 plasma refit occurred much earlier in Y92. So because of the tactical warp, it implemented them sooner, but it really didn't help all that much. All the ship dates remain the same. This means that some Y-Tech ships get in plasma and W-Tech ships get seeking plasma, and Y-Tech always had seeking plasma. And in the middle years, the need for a heavy combat unit to counter the war Vulture caused the Gorns to make that early dreadnought, which previously was just speculation, and this is saying that they did it in this scenario. They actually did create those early year dreadnoughts. And as I mentioned here, oddly, the wars the Gorns and the Romulans fought ended up being broadly similar with the same results. The primary difference was that more ships and vastly more lives were lost on both sides in these conflicts. And also, neither power ever tried to flank the other, the Gorns simply wanted the Romulans to stop, and the Romulans were mysteriously focused on conquering the Gorns. And the Romulans apparently felt that with as dangerous as an enemy as the Gorns still around, they did not need to find any more and did not need the Federation involved. As a result, the Gorns did not meet the Federation until they would in the original. Unlike the Peruvians live alternate histories, the Gorns did not become a hardened warrior culture, even though they had more intense wars and greater loss of life. Because of technological advances on the Romulans, their culture was fundamentally the same. Yes, Kitty. Yes, something I can help you with. Sorry, I got my little boo-boo kitty. Mwah! Okay, I hate to do this, but I gotta let you go. Mwah. Ow! That was good. That was not good. Excuse me while I reattach everything to my headphones. Okay, right with right, and left with left. Oops. Okay. Okay. That is a better. And let's make sure. Okay, everybody's still around. Just want to make sure I did not lose anybody. Correct, Dave. And yeah, don't. Yeah, in this history, as they had no reason for any of the Klingon-built ships in this alternate history that I was just describing, Dave. Just so that you know, and definitely for those, I definitely think that I'll mention this now, and I'll probably mention it again. Which I really think you should get the R4J module, at the very least in the ebook form, and read it, because it's one thing I definitely enjoyed reading through these alternate histories is the thought process that starts at the beginning of this whole document, which talks about, okay, this is some of the ramifications for this. Now, I'm going to go through what's called Alt 2, which is interesting, which I did not recall. And here's what it describes. In the original history, the Romulans found a Klingon ship in Y-162 that had crashed into an asteroid at least 100 years earlier. While the wreck was over 100 years old, it was not a 100-year-old design. Instead, it was a relatively modern ship. When they checked on the records around the time it had likely appeared, they discovered there was prospecting activity in the system just a couple of years after it had crashed. But the expedition at the time thought they detected Gendarian activity, probably the ship, and decided to leave. Had they felt the force to leave, and had they not felt forced to leave, the Romulans might have found this ship much closer when it crashed and gained amazing resource. And so, in this alternate history, what it's going for is something which is really interesting, where basically the Romulan prospecting team finds that lost ship, which was sent through some kind of time warp. That, from it doesn't say what year. No, it was an F4. So it was. It wasn't 100 years old. I mean, at that point. I mean, it wasn't here 100 years ahead of time. I think I forget when the F4. I think F4 is that a middle years. I think. But Yeah, okay, yeah. Unknown to them, they recovered an F4. The remaining hull included the engineering section, warp engines, the rear weapons, the shuttle bay, and the transporters. The boom section was completely mangled beyond recognition. The shuttles and drones were all missing, apparently used in some fight that happened before the ship met its end. And the computers appeared to have been completely wiped, so no logs or other information were available. The crew in the surviving hull section were present, but all dead. Apparently, prior to crashing into the asteroid, the bodies of the crew appeared to have starved to death, although there was no indication of an internal conflict. The ROMs recovered the surviving portion of the wreck and quickly set to work learning the technology of this unknown aliens. Now, obviously, mentioning that the crew appeared to starve to death, that's why my guess is why the computers were completely wiped. Because they did not want any foreign force that comes around and finds them to find any tactical or strategic information that might be useful, against them. Now, this is saying in Y75, that the Romans built a warp-powered fleet. And this is because they found it in Y65, and in 75 they start making their the WTech designs. The Romans launched a series of Y-Tech designs as a technology that recovered from the wreck, allowing them to completely skip the WTech designs. However, the plasma technology was completely unchanged, so that while they had faster and more capable ships, they still only had bolt-only plasma. I did not remember this from the Y module, which is basically they had the missiles, but plasma, they could bolt the plasma. They didn't actually have the ability to launch it yet. On the other hand, they had what's called Transporter 3. They mentioned the difference of Transporter 3 and Tractor. So, and that, for us, that means the range factor. In this case, they had Transporter 3, range 3 technology, decades ahead of any, although that tractor technology was still Tractor 1. Despite this head start, they still did not advance to MY Tech designs more quickly than in Alt 1 history. And Y76 says the Klingons made contact with Romulans. Romulans immediately recognized where the wreck came from and being careful not to spill their secret. They applied the Klingon representatives with questions on their technology capabilities. The Klingons were not foolish enough to provide anything that was usable to unlock any further secrets of the wreck, but what they did say showed the Romulans that the wreck was even more capable than what the Klingons currently had. So obviously, the wreck was from history, which was after Y176. And I don't know off the top of my head when the F4 became available. And finally in Y88, they seeking plasma. They get seeking plasma. And it mentions here that, from this point, Alt 2 effectively merges with Alt 1 and unfolds the same. While these Romulans do have long-range transporters years ahead of anyone else, this does cause some issues for their opponents. It is not a big enough advantage to substantially change the history, despite having more success in the third Gorn-Romulan War. The Gorns still are able to push the Romulans back to the original borders. Now, this one. Okay, Alt 3. To me, Alt 3 is actually one of the more interesting alternate history. And that is it's a juxtaposition. And that is, imagine that when Surak, it just mentions here that at some unknown date in a distant past, a philosophical and political leader named Surak taught a philosophy of emotional repression and that the supremacy of logical thinking. In the original history, and every old history that has been presented except this one, Surek's philosophy and political movement gained such power and influence that it completely reshaped Vulcan society. Those who rejected the philosophy tried to fight the changes in Vulcan society, but in the end lost. Those few that were not able to or willing to adopt chose to flee Vulcan entirely and tried to find a new home on the stars. These refugees, the ones that survived the trip, became Romulans. Now, in this alternative history, what it is it switches it. Instead of the Vulcans that stayed, that the change that Surek convinced the society to do, or at least in the case of the Vulcan society, to take upon itself, okay, that's what we want. It's opposite. Most of Vulcan society actually ignores it. Now, in the new timeline, this is what it says: the death of Surek. Early in the rise of Surek's movement, he suddenly dies. While many claim it to be an act of malevolence, nothing was proven, and it was just likely had been an accident or even natural causes. Regardless, Surek died in the beginning of the nascent movement. And therefore, the followers of Surek were small. And so, in that case, the Vulcans that stayed didn't have, they're called now, the new direction is called the Warlike Vulcan Society. Decided, it says, I think they got this wrong. Would not adopt to the new direction of Warlike Vulcan Society. And so that they call them Logic Romulans. And the Logic Romulans, they're the ones that basically have the philosophy of logical thinking and suppression of emotion. And those are the refugees that actually head towards the stars. So in this alternate history, that's what happens, which makes things really interesting. Because a couple things happen. One, the Logic Romulan Foundation is created. They don't explore much at the beginning. Now, the Warlike Vulcans the Vulcans still discover Terra, but they're warlike Vulcans, and it said they began subtle manipulation of the societies in Terra to make them more consistent with the warlike Vulcan philosophy. The warlike Vulcans also interact with other worlds in the immediate neighborhood, include Andor and Rigel. And that's at minus Y, that's minus Y150, minus Y100, that's when the logical Romulans in Romulus did some expansion. And the one thing they were shocked to find was that there basically was nothing around Romulus. So they said, despite finally starting to expand, they did so only very slowly because there was nothing close by. And then there was the first contact with humans and the warlike Vulcans. The humans developed a non-tactical warp and were greeted by the warlike Vulcans for the first time. The warlike Vulcans admitted that they had observed humans for 150 years, but had kept away until the Vulcans were likely to be useful. However, by this point, the humans knew the truth and were ready to take the advantage of this. Regardless, the warlike Vulcan manipulations had been quite successful, and the human society was organized very much like the current warlike Vulcans, with a similar system of corporations and planetary emperor and senate. And 3 years later, in Y1, Y4, the foundation of the Federal Imperium. So it's not a federation. It's an imperium. The warlike, mentioned here, the warlike Vulcans ended up making a serious miscalculation with the humans of Terra. They were trying to make the humans fit more like warlike Vulcan society. Unfortunately, for the warlike Vulcans, the humans adopted too well. Once they burst into the interstellar scene, the humans immediately started to throw their weight around and organized the new Federal Imperium. As they used a very egalitarian approach, unlike the warlike Vulcans' arrogance and aloofness, they were able to pull other worlds to their banner very quickly. The initial size involved were the Terrans, Alpha Centaurians, Andorians, Rigelians, and reluctantly the warlike Vulcans. The warlike Vulcans had reservation about joining the Imperium, but realized that this was the reality they were living in, and while the humans have outplayed them to start with, the warlike Vulcans were the experts, and they would be able to co-opt the Imperium in short order. Well, they never did take over. They still exerted enough power and influence that they were content with their position. Right. Now, this is where things go a little weird. And more, to my mind, a little bit more interesting. Okay, they're talking about the first Gorn permanent contact, and so forth. But the warlike Romulans recorded direction of the refugees. Okay, this is in Y40. It's called the First Imperium Romulan War Begins, which it's kind of a war, kind of not. Whatever. The warlike Vulcans recorded the direction of the refugees and had gone, while the warlike Vulcans had promised to let the logic Vulcans, later the logic Romulans, leave in peace. Certain factions of the warlike Vulcans were perpetually interested in finding the logic Vulcans again and re-entering them by force if need be. The war began when the expanding Imperium finally made contact with the logic Romulan Republic. The two sides never met face to face, and as a result, the Imperium did not recognize the logic Romulans were the long lost logic Vulcan refugees. The logic Romulans did warn the Gorns of this new hostile element and did not ask for help, as the logic Romulans were confident they would need it. The Orions joined the Imperium instead of, okay. And then in the First Imperium War ended and said, yeah, kind of. The Imperium had received much stiffer opposition than they expected, and the logic Romulans would make gains as they pushed back hard against the new and surprising aggressive enemy. And then the first tactical warp cruisers launched by the Federal Imperium, and then and that was Y62, and then Y66. The logic Romulans developed tactical warp, so they do it earlier. Now, I'm not going to go through this completely, but what's interesting here is one that the Romulans are never at odds with the Gorns. It's really, that's one of the fascinating parts, is that through this whole thing, the Romulans and the Gorns are actually good buddies. They share technology and the Romulans are even willing to give the Gorns like Mauler technology, which the Gorns actually end up using, and also say, we have a cloaking device. How about this? And they went, we don't need a cloaking device. But I think we'll be fine without it. So the Gorns had the option if they wanted to have cloaking technology, but they decide, nah, we don't need it. But the thing is, the Romulans are always in conflict with the Imperium, so they basically use the Gorns as allies. Now, one of the things that does happen, where is it? Dun, da, da. Which was later on. What happens is that the start of the General War. Okay, here's the start of the General War is a little bit different. Now, the war started as it did in the original history, with an attack on the Lyrans by the Lyrans on the Zindias, and the Klingons quickly joined the attack. This war, however, quickly diverges from the original history, as the Imperium attacked both the Zindias and the Klingons. Over the next few years, all the powers became involved in the General War. The Klingons pulled in the logic Romulans, who pulled in the Gorns. The Hydrans, seeing weakness of the Klingons, attacked the Klingons rather than the Lyrans. Now, quite busy with their own conflicts, the Klingons pulled back from the Zinni conflict in order to fight off the Imperium and the Hydrans. And the Zinnis, still fighting the Lyrans, and the Imperium reciprocated by effectively ceased hostilities with the Klingons, and the IC waited out the war, attempting to pacify the other powers as they did in the original history. So that part is a little different there. I forget, does this come up? I was looking at the Pravia versus the Sun Snake, and right, it's a little. Is this a little different? Okay, yeah. In this alternate history where you have the logic Romulans, Pravia is a little different. It says here, okay, this is why 194 in this weird logic Romulans alternate history. So in the 9 years since the blockade of the Pravian home system, the Pravian refugees were divided over what they should do. Some wanted to flee the region completely, some wanted to build a new empire, but most wanted to free their own home world. After much debate, the first group left, eventually migrating to Omega, but the other two groups tried to free their homeworld. Unfortunately, when the Liberation Force arrived at the homeworld, it was just in time to see the Sun Snake dive into their sun. In the hours they had until the Nova reached the world, they rushed into the planet and transported as many people as they could. They did so indiscriminately for as long as they had, while some of their ships viciously attacked the Gorn ships present, wiping them out. Then the Pravians fled before the Gorn reinforcements or the Nova could arrive, while these additional civilian reinforcements for their tiny colonies, they established a survivable population base at Gladiators. The Pravians kept their population stable by destroying surplus eggs with a need to rebuild the population. Entire clutches were allowed to hatch. And the Pravians then fled to their colonies and hid while they tried to figure out what to do. So basically, the planet was destroyed, but a lot of people were saved in this alternate history. Because of, the Gorns blockaded them, but they weren't as voracious about it. And of course, since the Pravians were able to save more people, they weren't just going off and trying to attack the Gorns at all costs. And then there's different alternate histories also added here, which is one Gorns versus the Sun Snakes. This alternate history starts with a scenario outlined in Capital number 28. And the Sun Snake that destroyed the Pravians' home sun never made it that far. Instead, it was attracted by the sun of Gadar 1, and due to the fleet disposition at that point in time, made it to the sun, causing it to go nova and destroy everything in the system. The result was that the utter destruction of the Gorn Confederation in Y84 and despair of surviving Gorns over the succeeding years. Some of those Gorns fled into Romulan space, while some houses killed or rejected the Gorn refugees. Many did not. These houses put their new Gorn subjects to work, resulting in Romulans gaining access to warp drive. Their first warp power ships started appearing in Y90. In this alternate history, the Romulans gained access to ships in Y90. After the Treaty of Smyrna, the Romulans used the ships consistent with original history, including the Kestrel ships. But there were no K-Tech ships, and the eventual adoption of the Hawk series of ships. So in this alternate history, basically, the Gorns are the ones that lose their home worlds to the Sun Snake, which again is an interesting one, where basically the Gorn Confederation disappears, which in my mind makes me wonder if the Romulans at that point took over any Gorn territory that was originally Gorn, part of the Gorn Confederation, and so the Romulan territory was actually larger than it originally was. Because that's one thing that's not mentioned here, but I would assume that would be the case, because of some of the Gorns, as I said, fled into Romulan space during that, and somebody from the sounds of it, the Gorns weren't as much of a power. I'm not sure. It doesn't mention here what happened with the other Gorns that didn't flee to Romulan space, and so forth. And then the last one is just the rise of the Paravians, which is also in history. It's already mentioned previously. It's, as I said, I think this last one, not the next last one, alternate number 3, I think it is. Just give me a sec. Yeah, alternate number 3, the Reflection Romulans. I think this one's the most interesting, just because of, you see such a change in the history because of that, because of instead of the Federation, instead of Terra being guided by this logical Vulcan presence and going, it's better. It's better if you don't try to force these people using strength and try to more bring people together in a coalition. And create a federation of planets, and who all work together for the greater good. In this case, when it comes to warlike Vulcans, they go, "No, you're out for yourselves," and use that power that, since you're stronger than them, you can say, "Join us or die," and they go, "We'll join you." And in this case, the Romulans aren't this aggressive race or aggressive empire. Sorry, Gene. This aggressive empire. And they work with the Gorns and build a coalition with them. And the Imperium is attacking attacking the Romulans. I did not see. I'm just wondering. Let's give me one sec here. Nope. I don't see anything here mentioned on this alternate timeline that the Gorns actually went to war with the Imperium. Outside of the General War. Okay, wait a minute. Here's mentioned. Okay, they had the first contact. The Imperium started probing past the declared border because the Imperium declares a border in Y102 and says, "Okay, this is our border," and that's kind of more of a suggestion. They're not going to stick to it. The Imperium started probing past the declared border and was stunned to find a fully established line of bases and an entire unknown empire. While the initial contact resulted in a shooting battle, both sides choose not to escalate the issue. So basically, the Imperium finds the Gorns and they go, I think we shouldn't attack these guys because it looks like they're already set up for defenses, and that's because I don't remember, but I feel pretty confident in saying that I think what happened was that the Romulans were telling the Gorns all about the Imperium and going, you probably should set up bases on your border too to protect yourself from if the Imperium decides to, to try to increase it. And now I know one thing that is mentioned in this is that when I thought I knew where it is, and it's not here. Okay, but I'm pretty sure I mentioned that basically the Gorns set up home bases right outside of the border declaration of the Imperium, and so in that case, that's okay, we're in the legal boundary, and as I mentioned before, this is what it says. The the rectified is the Imperium declared a border that was 4,750 parsecs from the center of the primary member zone, i.e., Terra. But even so, the Imperium neighbors interpreted this as the Imperium stating that this was to be a permanent border. This interpretation was not correct. Instead, this was the Imperium starting point for later expansion. It would take a few decades for everyone to discover this mistake. In the interim, this ended up being a net benefit for the Romulans, as it meant the border skirmishes that had persisted since the end of the Second Imperial War finally ended. So that's when the Gorns the Imperium declared the border. The Gorns said, okay, then we're gonna set up bases right outside the border, and say, okay, this is where we're going to be. This is our territory. Since you declared yours is this spot, okay, everything up to that's us. That's ours. I'm not sure how the Gorns and the Romulans came up with their border, because I don't think that's mentioned. That's one of those, in my mind, that's just one of those minor details that got worked out between them, and it's not really relevant to the history of it. The main point, also one thing I forgot to mention, and that's the Rigelian refugees. A large part of the Rigelians still refuse to submit to the Imperium, and they viewed the fractured fleet as a check on the Imperium's ambitions and feared that a unified focus fleet, in other words, forcing the Rigelians to be part of the Imperium's fleet, would end up on ending warfare rather than fight. They chose to flee, not unlike the Logic Vulcans. A few others from the other member planets also joined the immigration. They fled at the end of the turmoil caused and unification when they knew they were going to lose the argument. But while confusion still reigned, allowed them to leave undetected. By the time the Imperium discovered that they were left, the trail had gone cold. No one was sure where they went. Now, later on, what happens is actually the Romulans, they find these guys and go, wait a minute, why are you here? You're in our territory. But they they join the Federation, join the Logic Romulans and become like subjects of that empire. They willingly submit to it. It's like, okay, we'll join you. You guys seem like you're the good guys, so we'll join you. So, which is interesting. And I said, I find this one the most interesting of all of them, and I definitely, again, I will recommend this module R4J. Definitely purchase it. Go to the e-tailers. Warehouse 23, Wargame Vault, Drive-Thru RPG. Buy it there. If you want to, feel free to buy an actual paper version. You know, you made from trees. That kind of thing. Which is for those people. And I'm sure people who've listened to me for a while realize this is true, which is I will definitely not denigrate anyone who wants to buy physical copies of books, because Lord knows I've got quite a few physical copies of books, and I'm not in the whole let's save all the trees, because maybe just because of the way I grew up, but there are some things that I feel like you really need to have hard copy for, in your hands reading versus electronics, because in some cases I don't really remember the electronics, the version of the books as well, and I'm not sure why, and because it's not like I'm reading everything on my computer, on my iPad. I'm using these e-ink readers, so it's not direct light in my eyes. It's more effusive. It's more of the light that's bouncing from around on here, so it's e-ink, so I'm not sure why that's the case. It just is. It seems like to me. I might be wrong in my remembrance of that, but also in some cases I really feel like you need to have a physical copy of the book. And as I mentioned multiple times, and that is, I always feel like hard copies of books are the best form that you can actually have with you for learning a game. The electronic version is the best thing you can have when you're playing the game, where you actually can do searches through that ebook to find some obscure rule or okay, because come on, those of you who played SFB, how it was back in the day before the advent of computers, before they actually had electronic form of the rules, where you would have to do the whole guessing game. Okay, phasers. Okay, firing a disruptor through an ESG field. Okay, let's check the disruptor first. Okay, interactions. No, ESG. Okay, nothing there. Okay, then I think we're good. Is there any other possible rule that might be an effect that could affect it? I don't know. Things like that, where you might have to look at 3 or 4 different spots to find a rule when it comes to a certain interaction. Because you have hets where you have it limits when you can fire if this happens or that happens. It's hard. I'm coming up with some really bad examples, but there are those examples where you would be looking, even you found the section, then you have to go find it within the section, which was, and so you'd spend 15 minutes looking for the rule that says, oh yeah, you can do exactly what you said you could do. I think we've all, and for us who've played the game long enough before the electronic versions, I think you all would agree that yes, we all had done that. So
yeah, well, I think the non-electronic version, it's more of a tactile thing. It helps your memory with it,
mm-hmm.
And it's also hey boomer, that's how I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like the kids that are growing up today that are just totally being weaned on electronics almost exclusively.
Yeah.
So
there's
that. And,
yeah.
Plus we had to roll our dice, uphill both ways in the snow. So
right. But as I mentioned, Doug, I'm not sure if I mentioned it to you. I know I've mentioned it on the podcast multiple times, and anyone who's listened to me long enough can attest. and that is I feel encouraged when it comes to board games and the next generation coming up. The ones that are in their 20s. And that is
Mm-hmm.
that I feel some hope when it comes to games. That all the games are not going to be just purely electronic games. The kids still these kids these days, get off my lawn. That the young adults and
I agree.
even teenagers, they're still interested in physical copies of games and playing it, on a table with a board with, these different counters or pieces or whatever to play the game instead of having completely electronic.
There's
Yes.
there's essentially a resurgence in it because the thing is, from a totally different standpoint, if you think about it, board gaming in general, tabletop gaming in general, it evolved into a successful thing from, nearly scratch 150 odd years ago, 120 odd years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just something that evolved over time. And then you have this point where electronic games, hit with a big, huge splash and took a lot of people away from the face-to-face kind of gaming. But that particular splash isn't a permanent thing. Like it's like, the rock hit the pond, the water hit you, but it's gone back into the pond, so to speak. And the reason it was popular is that people are social critters. And, and a lot of the electronic gaming, even if you're in an MMORPG, isn't always that social. And, people like to hang out with their friends. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of basically it, or meet new people in person. The concept, huh?
Oh, agreed.
So,
agreed.
Yeah.
And
it's coming back.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And it's Little Wars TV was doing some, interviews and convention stuff, and they were asking why are we in a graying, field with their wargaming stuff, and in one of their various videos on it, they have a thing where they're actually showing that there are a lot of younger people coming into their particular part of the gaming community. So, it's just one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage people to come out and do stuff like that. And quite frankly, it's a function following form kind of thing, in my opinion. Oh, speaking of which, Gamers and Winners about 7 weeks away.
Yep,
Getting down to 6 weeks away.
Yeah, and I will be working on that. Working on the event.
I mentioned to Mr. Barry that we were talking about the possibility of a tournament for SFB there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind and basically that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And I actually talked to him earlier this week about said thing, and I told him, which I'm going to tell you, which is at least this past week, it was like, okay, that's way low on my priority list on focusing on that, because I had other things that are more definitely have been more of my focus, including things like having it so that my daughter actually has health insurance, things like that.
Oh yeah.
That to my mind have taken up my brain space. But I definitely will be looking into that. Obviously, I know the key there is going to be advertisement. Getting out the word, encouraging people to come and play and so forth. Even if it's a small tournament, like 8 people, that would be fantastic if we can get 8 people.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the more the merrier is always the theme. but you know, even eight people, we could actually have a tournament with 8 people. You know,
Oh, absolutely.
and we could get through it in 2 days. You know, because if we got 8 people, what we could easily do is we do single, a bracket tournament, and if people want to, after they can done, they can play again against one of the losers, or maybe set up a Swiss tournament. You know, where you have where that okay, if you lose in the first round, then you go into the losers bracket, and then you can then play against those people in the losers bracket, which make up the matchups, and then at the very end, the person from the winners bracket plays the person from the losers bracket, and then they play for the championship.
Mm-hmm.
So it allows, at the very least, it takes 2 losses to be kicked out of the tournament. When it comes to the beginning. So, it's as I said, it's an I like Swiss in that category. And so if people want to do that, I'd be happy to run it as a Swiss. So then it guarantees that they won't be knocked. If they're knocked out of the first round, they still have they can still play at least a second game at the very least, if not play more.
Hi.
So, okay, with that, I think we will wrap it up for this evening. My dear, good Doug, you have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Thanks for having me on.
Always happy to have you here. So, went through a quick, an hour long review of the Module R4J. Obviously, I didn't go in great detail because it would have been another 3 or 4 hours, and I think then there would be no reason for you to actually buy the module. But again, I think as I pointed out, I think that I've really enjoyed Alternate History 3, where the Romulans are no longer the Romulans. The Romulans are the Vulcans. And the Vulcans are the ones who actually take over that vastness of space and actually become like friends to the Gorns. And the Federation is now the Federal Imperium. So they're kind of like the bad guys to a certain degree. It makes it, they're more aggressive in their nature. So it makes definitely the general war. Obviously, I think the general war would definitely turn out a little bit differently. To me, the interesting part about that would be how would that affect the Andromedan War at all? With everything, with the IC and the Andromedans, would that still go the same way? Because one thing, I think ADB is kind of pointing towards that, just because of obviously the last line that it mentioned about the general war. The IC just waiting it out. Also, they seem to think that those kind of forces, like on the other alternate histories, I think it's the second, I think it is, history, where the Romulans actually got warp technology earlier, where they just said, everything resulted in the same. It's just that there were more bodies lying around, basically. So, and that being the case, that this makes me feel like the ADB thinks that history would not have been changed all that much when it comes, if just the Romulans just got the warp technology earlier, But also, one of the great things about the module is that it tells you, okay, if you want to play out this alternate history, here's what you do. And I would definitely, I would get it. And if you want to play some scenarios, especially with the W Tech and the Y Tech and maybe the MY Tech, ships that are, the alternates of what they are, modify things slightly according to, that alternate history, which would be interesting, but because part of that would be that in the alternate history, I don't. I'm just going to do one quick check, and that is, I don't think. Okay, yeah, it talks about the effects on the other ones. Things like for the third alternate history where you have the Federal Imperium, the Federation decides that, okay, no, they're going to use PFs. They didn't have the third wave, no SWACs, no phaser Gs. And it talks about some of the minor modifications to things, what would happen in that case. But anyhow, with that, I am Paul Franz, and I bid you a good night.